Today, it's a real honor for me to introduce Professor Williamson, or Bill Evers, an American political activist and educational researcher. Um, he became a resident at Stanford's Hoover Institution, a national fellow, then a visiting scholar, and his career goes on and on and on through, and I'll cover a few of them, a few of the turns he's taken. He has an interesting, if tempestuous, history in the libertarian movement. But in the 1990s, he transitioned from the libertarian movement to the Republican Party. He was on President George W. Bush's transition team. After that remarkable 2000 election, was an advisor for John McCain, Mitt Romney. He's been on the Republican State Central Committee, acted as an advisor to gubernatorial campaigns, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. 2001, he was appointed to President Bush's White House Commission on Presidential Scholars and appointed by Education Secretary Rod Page to the National Education Research Policy and Priorities Board. I can go on and on and on, but I must go back to one thing that hit me personally, very personally, that he was an outspoken participant in the math wars. This speaks to a very shocking evening in my own past, helping our older daughter with her homework, and I was introduced to the shocking topic of integrated math. And I've never quite felt the same about our educational system ever since I found what they were capable of in introducing integrated math. I'd have another shock with our younger daughter on whole language, but before I go on any longer, let me turn it over to Bill Evers.
Well, thank you very much, Steve. Just to mention a few other things and then to tell you the thing that's most important. So I also served in Iraq, running the school system there in 2003. I was the U.S. Assistant Secretary of Education for Policy under George W. Bush. And I ran the Trump transition advisory team, agency advisory team for the U.S. Department of Education beginning just after the Republican convention in 2016 and running through the inauguration. So the most important thing is my wife. My wife is a past three-time president of the Laguna Niguel Republican Women Federated and past president of the Orange County Federation of Republican Women, which doesn't exist anymore. There's been some sort of regional fusion, but when she was the head of it, it had 2,500 members. So it was pretty big then. Okay, so let's talk about this. And the way I thought I would approach the general topic of what lies ahead in federal education policy is I'd very briefly run through what are going to be some of the emphases if President Trump continues in office. And then I would spend the bulk of the time with the possible prospect of Joe Biden being the president. So I first want to give you a sense of how to look at this. I think you should look at it, you can look at it in terms of the rhetoric of the different people that propose various things. You know, they talk about, we're going to help the education of the poor, we're going to help the education of certain racial minority groups. There's various different things that people talk about in terms of rhetoric, which is fine. You know, and we can look and see if the things actually will do that. We can look at the merits of the different educational policies, and I think that should be done. Or I think we can look at interest group analysis. So interest group analysis would say, well, who's pushing these things? Who would benefit from these different policies? And we can still look at it from an interest group standpoint and go back to the rhetoric and whether the rhetoric is being fulfilled, and we can look at the merits and cost benefit analysis and effectiveness of the measures as well. So I'm going to take that interest group approach. I think it's most fruitful for us. It's a political way of looking at it. We are all political actors, those of us who are listening to this call. So what I'm thinking is the big group that we're talking about here is the clients of big government and ideological proponents of big government and all the associated proclivities that come with that. So we're talking about the subsidized beneficiaries of big government and the accompanying ideologies that promote expanding big government. And who are we talking about here? Well, we're talking about people who are employed by the welfare state. We're talking about the intelligentsia that support the welfare regulatory state. And then we can broaden this out because the ideology that supports these institutions and these people is pervasive in higher education and in K-12 education and in the urban professions and in the artistic community, extending broadly out to Hollywood celebrities and all sorts of things. It's pervasive in the news media. And so it's those people versus the rest of us. And we all listening to this are in the rest of us. So that's what I think how we should look at this. So Trump is generally supporting of the rest of us. I'm not saying there are no crony people that glom onto the Trump administration or that try and make get some advantage or special privilege from Republican things. There are, but in general, we are defending the middle class. We're defending private property and free enterprise. We're defending the traditional family, traditional religion against big government's incursions on those things. And this new class of people's efforts to get money and privilege and power at the expense of us. So that's kind of the conflict that's going on. So if you look at Trump's efforts, they're generally defensive, trying to defend regular people against this. So what has he done? Well, he pushed back on political correctness and cancel culture in higher education, including trying to put in an executive order that would kind of keep some of this at bay. So it's kind of complicated because we don't really want the federal government policing in an intimate way speech on campus. On the other hand, we don't want federal research dollars going to places, to schools, to colleges, to universities where there isn't an atmosphere of free intellectual exchange, because then you can't really have rigorous research going on. Trump, through the Justice Department, has pushed back on racial quotas in college admissions. This is, they don't talk about them in terms of racial quotas because that would be illegal, but they talk about it in terms of diversity. And he's tried to fix borrower defense, which I'll get into when I get into what the Biden people will do, but it has to do with loan forgiveness for people that have gotten student loans. In K-12, Trump has detached the government from supporting Common Core, which was a set of national curriculum content standards. He can't get rid of it, really. We still have it in California because they're adopted by the states, but he's stopped federal support for it. And when I say Trump, I also mean Betsy DeVos, because of course she has been implementing these things. And he continued support for charter schools, in other words, not putting federal impediments in the way of charter schools, giving some startup money or seed money for some of them, continued support for faith-based schools, K-12 schools. And so in general, he's been trying to defend the rest of us. Okay. So now how about Biden? So his program, and I include speeches that he's made, the Democratic Party platform, his website, and crucially, the Biden-Sanders Unity Task Force recommendations. So at a certain point, Biden had defeated Sanders, but he wanted to get the support of the Sanders people who have enthusiasm and essentially are the idea promoters in the party. The middle ranks of the party are not really full of a lot of ideas. It's more the AOC, Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, the squad. These people are coming up with the ideas, the socialist ideas or moderate socialist ideas, if you want to be generous to them. And so he wanted to capture some of their ideas but still not have every idea so that he could appear to be a more moderate Democrat and to try to capture some of the center voters. But a huge amount of Biden's education program has to do with spending more money. So it's subsidizing this new class of people, these college-educated, verbalist, knowledge worker people that support big government. So he wants to subsidize teacher salaries. Well, public school teachers are a perfect example of this new class of knowledge workers. And of course, this is also a kind of mutual reciprocal back scratching, since the unions gave him a huge amount of support, both financial and, I guess not so much legwork as telephone work and other things that helped during the campaign. So a lot of the programs are also income transfers from the middle class and the lower middle class, who are generally Trump supporters, to the upper middle class or the very lowest income groups. So universal pre-K is mostly, so for really poor people, this is already covered. It's really the professionals who would, instead of having to pay for themselves, they would get it free. So that's an aid to upper middle class. Free public college, this is again an aid to the upper middle class. Expanding federal financial aid, this is again an aid to the upper middle class. Canceling some student debt, again, the people who take on debt are people who are going to have higher income later. Again, an aid to the, so his $10,000 per individual forgiveness plan, which is his minimal plan. Chuck Schumer and Elizabeth Warren are pushing for much more, but his limited $10,000 per recipient would cost the taxpayers $420 billion. That's a lot of money. Okay, so I'll just go in a little bit more about this. This is a very funny thing in the Babylon Bee recently. I know you're all fans of the Babylon Bee, which is a satirical website that you can find on Facebook and elsewhere. And it's very funny stuff. So they have this thing with a picture of a plumber, and he says, "I'm so glad to be paying for my wealthy neighbor's daughter's gender studies." Okay, so they're going to cancel her debt, and he gets to pay. So local plumbing contractor Sam Cawthorn is really looking forward to paying the tab on his neighbor's $89,000 gender studies degree. "Listen, I'm just a plumber. I didn't go to college, but I work hard and support my family. I don't know about all that highfalutin gender stuff they teach in college, but I'm sure it must be important since it's so expensive. Happy to help out another person in need." This is pretty funny, and it gets at this exact kind of interest group analysis that I'm talking about. According to studies, this is the Babylon Bee continuing their satire, there are millions of white girls working in coffee shops around the country while struggling under crushing student debt they acquired by irresponsibly obtaining college degrees that give them no marketable skills whatsoever. Benevolent politicians have proposed transferring all the wealth from trade workers and minority business owners to help the indebted white girls with their student loans so they can still afford their daily latte and cat food expenses. Anyway, so we have to insert a little humor into these serious subjects here. So there are various things that they want to do to lessen indebtedness of the prospective new members of the. So one thing is this borrower defense repayment to repayment things. So when you so federal government has assumed control of pretty much all of college debt. And in the loan agreement you sign when you're a student, if you're getting this federal money, this loan, is a thing called the borrower defense to repayment. So you can say, look, I paid for college, but I didn't get college. The school closed down, something, okay? I mean, if you didn't get it, right, then maybe you shouldn't have to pay. But the way it's worded is very tricky. The student can claim that ads or recruiting spiels were misleading or led to an inadequate student experience. And as interpreted by the Obama administration in regulations that they wrote just as they were going out the door. So while I was on the Biden transition team, while I was on the Trump transition team and the Biden people were leaving, they said college misconduct can include misunderstanding by the student. So if a student didn't understand what the college is all about, then it doesn't have to be an intended thing by the college to deceive the student. It could just be that the student might not be sophisticated or might not have some knowledge that might have been helpful in understanding the deal with what was going on in the college or in the loan. So anyway, so the Trump administration re-regulated on that and said that the students had to show both that they suffered financially and that they were defrauded. Okay, that makes sense. If you're defrauded, you should get your money back, right? Biden has promised to return to the lenient Obama forgiveness policy. And they also have a thing where you can get money. This exists now. It's been going on through multiple administrations, Republican and Democrat. You get loan forgiveness if you work for the government or public schools or government-approved nonprofits. Again, this is an aid to this new class of knowledge workers that are pro-big government. But anyway, it's there. So the Obama people have promised to streamline this and to add a new forgiveness programs along the same lines to forgive up to $50,000 for employees of this public sector and certain nonprofit groups. Okay, and then currently, you can't really declare bankruptcy in order to get out of your college loans. It's written that you can't. But they want to change that to make it easier to declare bankruptcy to get out of your student loans. So this is all subsidies to either existing members of the new class or recruiting or training new members of these pro-big government contingency. So part of their ideology is so we have these people and they also have beliefs. So the beliefs are in big government solutions, but also in radical forms of egalitarianism, skepticism about the market, about private property, about traditional religion, all these different things. Radical egalitarianism is part of that. So they want to have campus kangaroo courts in sexual assault cases. So you don't get to confront your witnesses. You don't have cross-examination. You don't have high evidentiary standards. It's just you're basically railroaded. And I mean, obviously, rape is a terrible thing. And if somebody is engaged in sexual assault, they should be prosecuted, and they probably shouldn't be running around a college campus. But if you just take every accusation and say, oh, okay, you must be right, there's going to be a lot of people that are in trouble. So they want to restore those campus kangaroo courts. They're going to have some trouble because the courts have been finding that these kangaroo courts do not give adequate protection to the due process of the accused. So even though they talk about doing this in order to satisfy their egalitarian and radical feminist constituency, they're going to have pushback from the courts. They probably won't be able to get this in. Even all this big spending that I just talked about that he promises, assuming that the Republicans hold the Senate, it's going to be hard to do this. Some of it they might be able to put in some forgiveness through executive action. So the Secretary of Education is given a lot of discretion in administering the student loan program. But the idea that Schumer and Warren have of $50,000 of forgiveness, I don't see how I don't think the federal courts will let them treat that as just administrative fine tuning. Continuing on with their satisfying of their ideological egalitarianism, there's also this critical race theory, which is the idea that everything in the American system and culture is designed to foster and enforce the hegemony and power of white people over black people. And so you see this in the 1619 Project and all over the place, where I'm sure you're all used to hearing about it. But this ties in with the old problem of racial preferences in college admission. So giving extra points to diversity and things like that. And so that's going to probably come back. They had a war during, part of the anti-private enterprise, anti-competition aspect of this ideology. They had a war against private for-profit colleges during the Obama administration. And they promised to come back on that again. So this Biden-Sanders unity team recommendations calls for-profit colleges predatory, says we shouldn't let veterans go to private colleges and private for-profit colleges. So that's kind of it for higher education and how this new class special interest group thing is going to go in. Just continuing now into K-12, and then I'll be winding up as soon as I finish summarizing that. It's important to bear in mind that when you talk about putting huge amounts of money into K-12, it doesn't work. Okay. We've been doing that. So take 1970 as a year to start. Okay. So money goes up like this in constant dollars. Performance is flat or slightly declining. So all these programs for putting big money into schools that have concentrations of low-income students, into special education that's aid for learning disabled kids, all these subsidies to teachers' salaries that they're talking about, they have no real evidence that this is going to boost student performance, that's going to boost student achievement. Okay, and this is a subject widely debated in the policy literature. And if they could show, hey, one-to-one correlation, dollar more, this amount of gain in student achievement, they'd have a lot easier time, but they have to pull the wool over our eyes with all sorts of fancy rhetoric. So they want to start out by having massive cash infusions. This is the Biden program in the name of COVID-19 safety and recovery. But they're not so keen. They defer to the teachers' unions on return to in-person classroom teaching. So they want to have more money, but not be there. It's an amazing racket if you can pull it off. So even the New York Times kind of balked at this. And as you know, they're pretty pro-Biden. I take the New York Times every day for my sins. And they were quite unsettled. They said the president-elect, they're, of course, naming Biden the president-elect, closeness with the powerful teachers' union is unsettling. Parents and state and local officials are concerned, in the words of the Times, that the union's opposition to in-person instruction conflicts with science and with students' well-being. So even the New York Times is saying, hey, these unions are just doing this out of their own fears and desire to get more money, and not the science and not the students learning or the students getting adequate socialization and friendships and other things that are byproducts of students. So another thing they want is universal early childhood education, universal preschool. This is also, this is another subsidy to the well-to-do, because well-to-do are currently paying. They would have it subsidized for that. They want universal free school lunch. This actually might be a rare example of something where poor people would be helped by something these people are proposing. And another thing they want to do that's kind of the epitome of welfare state spending on part of the Biden administration's proposal is expand community schools, community school approach. So don't be fooled by the phrase community school. It really has nothing to do with meaning, tied into your local community or something like that. It means that the school has an educational aspect to it, but it also has a health clinic and psychiatric services and on, a full array of welfare state services. It's like mini Sweden surrounding the school. You got a localized welfare state station that surrounds the school. By the way, they've studied to see if these schools do better, the students in these schools do better academically than students in similarly situated schools that don't have these wraparound welfare state. No, they don't do any better. So it's just a subsidy to these welfare workers and a new class of knowledge workers. So I mentioned again the egalitarianism is feature of their ideology, and a huge current cutting edge thing is pushing biological males into girls' sports restrooms and locker rooms. I know you've heard about this. So Biden's official platform says that he's going to reinstate the Obama administration's 2016 transgender student guidance, and he's going to do that on day one. And so that guidance says that biological males who identify as transgender can use girls' restrooms and locker rooms. Now, the Office of Civil Rights in the Trump administration, that is in Betsy DeVos's education department, argued that it violated the rights of biological females for biological males to participate in girls' sports, to compete against them in girls' sports. Presumably, the Biden administration, although it hasn't been explicit on this, will no longer defend the rights of the biological girls in these cases. Another issue is racial quotas, racial analysis of student discipline. So let's say it turns out that Croatian students in America, children of Croatian families, have more disciplinary problems than children of Montenegrin families. Well, that is problematic, according to the Biden people. Everyone should have exactly the same problems of interrupting in class or pushing in the playground or whatever. And if some group has more pushing, as recorded by the teachers or the recess supervisor or something, this is suspect. This could be a federal offense. Okay? So, obviously we don't want unfairness, but to only do this based on a statistical analysis and not examine actual cases that show some kind of unfair bias, that's very dangerous, and that's what they want to bring back, statistical disparate impact analysis. So they also want to overall, again, this is part of egalitarianism and part of critical race theory. They view testing, particularly statewide standardized testing given on a regular basis, as part of the No Child Left Behind Act said they have to have testing. The states can determine the testing. The states can control the testing. The states can do the content of the testing. Although the Obama people tried to put the Common Core in there as the content of the testing. Anyway, and obviously the Biden people might get some favorable reaction from certain kinds of conservatives on this, but they want to get rid of testing. They view it as racially biased and as not capturing the whole child. So they want to diminish or reduce or eliminate the role of testing in determining student success and in guiding educational reform. So I just conclude by throwing out another example of their prejudice against private enterprise and against competition Obviously, they're against vouchers. They're trying to roll back charter schools, particularly for-profit charter schools, just like their war against for-profit colleges. So they want to have no longer any federal money that goes to help a for-profit management team for a charter school. So a charter school is a public school, but it can have an independent management, independent of the district, of the local school district. And that could be a parent group, it could be a teacher cooperative, it could be a nonprofit, or it could be a company. Okay, so not many of them are companies, but a few of them are. And it can be other things. It can even be like a college could run it. Okay, but the point is they want to outlaw for-profit entities running these charter schools, which is legal still in some places. So a friend of mine in the education reform movement is named Rick Hess. He's not as thoroughgoing a critic of big government as I am, but he's got a lot of good insights. His name is Rick Hess. He's at the American Enterprise Institute. And he defends the for-profit effort in school reform. He says, look, if the for-profits are going to be more efficient and innovative. They are disciplined by the eyes, by the alertness of investors who want to make sure their money is put in a good place. They can offer employees highly remunerative long-term job opportunities in a way that public schools can't for top management. They can draw on the equity markets. They can draw on money that's out there seeking capital, that's seeking placement in a way that, of course, nonprofits and public schools certainly can't. So Hess says, look, for-profit entities have an incentive to be early adopters of efficient and innovative techniques in teaching. And in a nonprofit or in a public school, I'm hearing a little echo here. Nonprofits and public schools don't have an incentive because change makes waves. Change interrupts the routine of existing staff. So there you have the vision and who is going to be served by the Biden program should Biden become president. I think it's a rather ugly prospect overall. I really don't think, despite claims that the Biden people have in their documents that they'll pursue evidence-based instruction and teaching techniques and organizational things, that they will do so. The most telling example of this is we know that opportunity scholarships, sometimes called vouchers, and charter schools have pulled a lot of kids that would otherwise be lost in failing schools and allowed them to succeed and perform well. And yet these things that great amount of research show are very valuable to kids and to their parents are things that the Democrats oppose because of the interest groups that they're aligned with. And so I think anytime they say, oh, we're pursuing the evidence, we're pursuing the science, check it. Don't necessarily believe it.